July 21st, 2014. We're going to continue with how far did we get? We were talking about Pappy and when he went to the railroad.
Can you go back and play back what our last couple sentences were? Can't you do that?
I can, but it's more complicated because we have to go find it on the computer. We didn't really discuss it. We got off on a tangent. We weren't sure whether Pappy stayed at home all the way until he went into the service. And then when he came out of the service, if he went, like, what was he doing when they were married in 1921?
Working for his father.
Well, and I have...
Now, he may have been doing some day work beside that.
Well, and wasn't he helping with Sarah Jane's farm? This one's Sarah Jane. In 32.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a ways after. He buys... No. Where was it? Oh, down here. 1921, he farms John Emanuel's farm.
Right.
And he was married in 1921. So I imagine after they got married, he helped with that.
Right, because that's when Uncle Dave, and I don't know if he lived with Uncle Loring and Aunt Margaret or not.
If Uncle Dave lived with them or if Pappy?
Well, he left Shermansdale because he was working at the railroad.
This is Pappy, James Franklin.
Right?
This is Pappy that you're talking about.
Right. But Uncle Dave and Uncle Loring worked for the railroad. And Pappy he did the farming on the farmer, and that's when he worked at the mill to run the mill for John Smith. Because...
No, wait. Jeremiah.
Well, his son had the business then, Jeremiah, and his wife moved in and lived with Frank Dunkelberger and family. And under their steps, they lived in a big house. It was the most awful construction you've ever seen. But they had a cow, and they farmed, but mostly he had made enough money that he could retire. And then when, of course, Loretta being the only female in that family, and so she took care of her parents, and they moved in with, and I assume that her brothers and sisters, well, she had no sisters, but her brothers helped to maintain and take care of these, because they were pretty much bed confined. I can remember them going in and speaking to them as a child.
This is Jerry and, is it Lydia or Lucetta?
Lydia.
Lydia.
But they were both mostly confined to bed. But they were in bed when we went. Of course, my mother always went and spoke to them when we were there. And we visited back and forth the families from Wellsville, from New Kingston. They didn't think anything of driving over to from New Kingston over into the Delville area, Delville, Shermansdale area.
How many miles was that?
I would say 14 or 16 miles one way, maybe a little bit more.
And this is later on when they had a car, or this is in the days of still horse and buggy? Or both?
Well, Pappy had a car, I think, when they were married. I'm not 100% sure about that. But horse and buggy was still quite in the operating. Automobiles came into pretty much after the First World War. And that's only when the people had money to buy them. And of course there were no macadam roads at that time, so you didn't drive the vehicle that you had because you couldn't get around with it because of the mud roads and that, so the horse and buggy was still quite in use. In fact, I can remember...
I never really thought of that they phased in the car. I mean, that you still had a horse and buggy to plow the fields or whatnot, but that you might take it over the car for some reason or another.
When Grandma Rollerson graduated from high school, she got a horse, a riding horse, because they weren't popular then. But the economy picked up after.
That was like 1916 is what comes to mind that she graduated.
Yeah.
Is that about right?
Class of 1916.
Okay.
And so I know that
The mail.
Pappy had I guess it was a sedan, but the cars then didn't have tops on them. You had a cover come up like over the buggies, and then you had isinglass windows that in the winter you snapped over the door to keep the heat in. And the heat was taken off the engine into the car, and there was no way of controlling it. If it got too hot, you took the windows off.
Huh.
And well, there were no windshield wipers on the original car. The windshield wiper was one, but you used your hand to move it back and forth. And there was only one on the driver's side. The other one didn't have one. Now there was a time that one of them had a split windshield that would open out.
Okay.
To get you air into it, and it had much like a opening window out in the porch like that. You had to open both sides and push it out. It opened
A little
about,
crank.
Pardon?
A little hand crank.
Well, it wasn't a crank, it was a lever.
Well, I remember the little triangular windows that were on. That's how you did the defrost in the front seat.
Yeah, but that was much later.
Yeah.
And in the early days, they were separated from the window.
Yeah.
They were separated from the window. But I know that Pappy had some kind of a vehicle. Now, it was bought secondhand, and I know that they had trouble with tires in the early cars.
Did they have air in them like they do now? Because now the wave is to go without air.
Well,
have you seen some of the cars with tires that have no air in them now?
No, I haven't.
I don't know how much it's taking hold, but every once in a while you'll see one on the road.
Well, but the tires that they had then were quite large because they were accustomed to having the buggy wheels.
Yeah.
And why do they have big wheels in the buggy? So every time it went around, it went further.
Launched forward.
Than the small one. And that's one of the reasons why they were big. I remember as a kid, one of the ladies, she was a SME, a friend of a relative of Othniel Kittner. And I told you about where they run where we run the buggy down the roadway over in Shermansdale. And I know that the house sit here, and there was up to the barn and we got the frame of a buggy. We'd push it up that hill and then ride down to the road.
Just let it go on its own?
Well, sure, they were light, but you didn't have any way to. It was one horse that pulled a buggy, and you had
Like the Amish today. They have
Yeah,
one horse. Mhm.
but they have it goes out along the horse, and the horse pulls it, and it's hooked to. But this, when they turn, that's what turns the wheel, and so we had ropes tied to those, and we guided it with that. It wasn't very good. If you hit a stone or something, that knocked it out of line. But they brought one of those ladies over to stay with Mimi and help her take care of Grandma. And